Fix that. Open up chat. Good evening, Troy and Vincent. I don't know. 2 of you guys in the chat, but only 1 logged on. That's awesome. I'm not sure how the numbers work out. John and Charles are here. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Douglas is here. Barry's here. Looks like I have sound. And Douglas is here. We have the gang is all here, one way or another. Joe, you gotta not sleep all day, buddy. Troy says it's loud and clear, so it must be. Mark Goodwin, awesome. We're getting there. All right. So welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about top coat finishes. We're not going to finish anything, but we are going to try and discuss some of my favorites and hopefully answer a few questions and do all of that kind of stuff. And with a little luck, we'll try and keep it in the regular time frame. So we'll see what happens. Oh, Greg's here and Brian. We're doing pretty good. All right. So because this is a live kind of a thing, one of the first things I'm going to do is ask you guys a question, and I'm going to check out the chat and see if I get the answers I'm looking for on it, and then we'll go from there. So I said I was going to talk about top coat finishes. So why do we finish wood? What would be some of the reasons why we want to put some kind of a finish on top of our wood, on top of our projects? Yeah, Monks is in the house, all right. And Skip's here too, so we're good. And Joe correctly pointed out that Monks is Monks. All right. And John's here, and the other Skip is here. So at least somebody's paying attention instead of just chatting. Yeah, so Greg says protection and to seal it. What am I sealing it from? Yeah, this back and forth thing is going to be a little slow tonight. We'll have to try this a different way sometime and see if we can't get more rapid in. Troy says humidity management, wood movement, appearance. Leo's here. Awesome. And Jeffrey, moisture. There we go. We're starting to get some ideas. Douglas says, bring out the beauty of the wood. It makes those wood projects look better. I'm assuming when you say pops, you're not talking about me, but you're saying it makes the figure in the wood pop. All of those are pretty good reasons. Age, light effects, perfect. Sealer is used for protection. Yeah, so top coat finishes, the whole idea is to enhance the beauty of the piece, preserve the look of that piece. And we're protecting it from moisture intrusion, dirt, dust, grime, scratches, chips, dents, all of those things, depending on the type of finish that we're going to use. And those things certain finishes tend to have some pros about how well they're abrasion and scratch resistant, while they don't necessarily offer water and alcohol resistance. But other types of finishes tend to have a little bit more water and alcohol resistance, but they don't, they don't, they're not light fast or color fast or any of those kinds of things. So there's a lot. Dogs chewing. I'm not sure there's any real finish there, Charles, that will stop a dog from chewing through. So there's a lot of those things that you guys said that are the reasons why we use top coat finishes. So realistically, since we're trying to protect the wood from pollutants and damage of a variety of in a variety of natures there, the idea is if I can get a good hard finish that penetrates deep into the fibers, it's going to probably preserve the look of that piece a lot longer. Nothing is 100% scratch resistant. Nothing is 100% light resistant. Nothing is 100% moisture resistant. So we have to kind of deal with Dave's ultimate insanity sauce for dogs. Well, that's a whole different kind of a thing. So what I've got on the table here in front of me, or my workbench in front of me, and I'm not sure how much I'm going to use the close-up camera tonight because it doesn't really matter. The brand names of these things and stuff like that aren't really super important. These are finishes that, to a varying degree, I use here in the shop. Some things, kind of like this brushing lacquer, are very scarce, are hardly used here. While other things, the tung oil and some of the other finishes, the shellac and stuff like that, are used with fair regularity. So the idea here is you've got basically two types of top coat finishes. You have oils, which penetrate and go in deep, and they offer a fair amount of moisture resistance, and sometimes that moisture occurs as alcohol. So certain oil finishes will help protect against alcohol damage, water damage, and those kinds of things. But they penetrate deep and they don't really build up so much on the surface. So they're not offering that abrasion or scratch resistance that you get out of some of the other film finishes that lay on top. So that's essentially your two types of top coat finish. You've got the penetrating finishes, which tend to be your oils, and then you've got your film finishes, which tend to be your shellac, your lacquer, your polyurinates, all of those kind of things. Now, to some degree, Rex is here. Awesome. To some degree, all of these finishes penetrate into the fibers of the wood. Now, clearly, if you spread some linseed oil or tung oil onto some bare wood, depending on how dry it is and how dry the atmosphere is when you're working with it, it's going to penetrate and dry up pretty quickly. And you'll see that it's just not laying on top of the wood. It's really soaking in. And the more you can get this stuff to soak in, the better the moisture protection is. So oils work out really well as finishes for things where you're going to have a lot of contact with moisture. That's not to say that you can set up a sprinkler and have it, have your piece out in the yard and have it get watered 3 times a day. Most furniture that you're building isn't going to be put outside. Another big problem you've got with the oils is they're not super light fast. So if you throw these things out into direct sunlight, I mean, you can finish outdoor furniture. If you make an Adirondack chair, you can finish it with tung oil. Nothing wrong with that at all. But it's going to tend to burn off a little quicker. It's going to, the wood is going to change color based on how much light exposure it gets. I'm pretty sure that most of you who are currently live watching, oh, Tim's here, cool, and Patrick, awesome. We're getting a pretty steady group of regulars here, so I'm enjoying that. So if I go back to that light fast thing, no matter what kind of wood you put out in the sunlight, eventually it's all going to bleach out. The sun has a tendency to sort of make everything kind of white or some variation of that eventually. If you don't believe it, wander the desert for a while. I'm sure you'll find a few animal carcasses around that have, all that's left of the bleached bones. It's just the way it works. It's the sun and the UV rays tend to just bleach the color out of everything. Now, I'm sure some of you who are currently watching live, a bunch of you have taken classes with me, we've talked about the fact that, cherry, maple, mahogany, you expose them to light, they get darker. Whereas walnut and a few other woods tend to get a little lighter. Now, that may be the case, but long term, the sun is going to lighten everything. So your cherry will get darker today, and it might be darker for years, but if you set it in direct sunlight for an extended period of time, it's going to bleach the color out of it. It's an inevitability. And some of these other film finishes have UV inhibitors that are added to the finish that help it stay color fast a lot longer. So what I've got on my left side, your right side of the screen, are technically, I guess, if we use the 18th century definition, these would, well, at least this stuff over here, the shellacs, would be varnish of some sort. So shellac, I qualify as a varnish. A varnish is, by definition, a solid dissolved in a spirit. And then, the idea is you reach a certain level of saturation, and then you can spread that on. Go back and watch the brushing video, and we'll talk a little. We're not going to talk about that now because this is about what the finishes are, what they do, and what their positive and negative attributes are. So shellac, I would qualify as, much like they did in the 18th century, as a varnish because it is a solid. It's the excretions of the lac bug, and it is dissolved for the most part in alcohol of some sort. Lacquer is typically today is a synthetic version of shellac. It's not what was originally created as lacquer. If you're looking for true varnish, What you're looking at is amber from a tree that is dissolved in the spirit would historically have been turpentine, which is uh, the distillation of the tree sap. So it's the solid is the amber, and the spirit is the turpentine. And the idea is you reach a certain level of solution, and again, spread it on there. It lays out the spirit evaporates off and leaves behind a finish that, for the most part, is laying on top. There is some soaking in and some penetration, but it's nowhere near as much as the oils. Okay. Again, what we have today, modern lacquers are pretty much more in line with what I've got on my right side, your left side of my bench. These are, and I hesitate to use that term that I used earlier, polyurinate, because these are actually two polyurethanes that I kind of like. They are, in the end, basically synthetic varnishes. They're not naturally occurring. If you're going to try and buy, and I wish I thought I still had a quart of tried and true varnish oil here, which is essentially linseed oil with tree amber that is dissolved in it. That said, I'm not sure whether I used the last of it, lent it to someone, or more likely, my wife took it and used it for something and didn't tell me that we ran out. Oh, Doug's here. Awesome. And Michael's here. Chuck finally got you off the big screen and on the iMac so I can interact. Awesome. And you're not even logged in with your wife's account, which is really good. That's great. So where was I before I interrupted my own self there? We were talking about polyurethanes. And again, somebody said the other week when we were doing the brushing demo, I said something about polyurinate, and then there was a comment that was, was that some kind of a Freudian slip? And for the most part, no. Where the general finishes stuff is concerned, I'm going to say yes. It's definitely not necessarily the case. They're still not my go-to finish for everything. Shellac tends to be my primary finish. I also like tung oil mixed with varnish, because now I'm starting to bring the best of all worlds together here. So we get the deepest penetration out of the oils, and the film finishes tend to lay on top, right? So with a film finish, depending on how hard it is, you're going to have, to a varying degree, better scratch resistance, abrasion resistance, dent resistance, chipping resistance than you would get from, and you're not going to get too much chipping out of an oil, but all of those other things you can get, the oils really don't guard against scratches, abrasions, and dents at all. So Leo's saying, poly dries in layers, not solid, no good for rubbing out. Okay, we're going to get to those there. You guys are good. And Jeffrey says, what are your thoughts on applying film finish over an oil? I recall that Mike Michelli, who may or may not be here tonight, I'm not sure, he hasn't said hello, at least not that I noticed, once told me that it was a bad idea. I think the rationale was oil takes forever to fully cure and will wrinkle your film finish. To some degree, he is correct. That said, I've colored a lot of pieces with homemade oil stain, which the base is linseed oil, which is what's in this can, thinned out with naphtha for the most part, sometimes turpentine, sometimes mineral spirits. But my go-to really is naphtha because it's quick drying. It's not turpentine. Like we're due to get a whole lot of rain here in the next 24 to 48 hours. Probably not the best time to be thinning out my stains with turpentine and applying them, because if it's humid, it takes turpentine forever to kind of dry up. And that's really the whole point of thinning down the oil, is that you get that deeper penetration out of there, and then that volatile sort of flashes off or is absorbed quicker, whatever, and it leaves behind the oil that can then cure into the wood that you're working with. Because I've done a lot of stuff with oil as my base on my color, you really have to work at it so that your environmental conditions are on the drier side, and that you can have it cure up pretty much in a short period of time, rather hours or days versus weeks or months, or ever. So to me, the idea is of spraying over top of, or brushing a film finish over top of an oil isn't necessarily off the plate. A few weeks ago, when I was at the Fine Woodworking in New England event, I had taken along a spice box that I had made. What I can tell you is there was an oil underneath of shellac, which was the final top coat on there. And Mike and several other people who did finishing looked at it and were, perfectly satisfied with the look that I got. The idea is I worked in very dry conditions. It kept it nice and warm in my shop. Put the oil on, did not rush putting on the shellac. I let it go until I was sure that it was cured. How do I check it? Normally, I'll take the heel of my hand, I rub it over a surface that I've oil stained. If it comes up shiny, I got to let it sit till tomorrow, and then try it again. And if it happens, so it's Tuesday night, it comes up shiny, I wait until sometime Wednesday morning, check it again. If it's still shiny, I come back Thursday morning. So you can see where keeping your shop warm and dry, and then using a more volatile thinner like naphtha is going to help that stuff flash off, dry up, for lack of a better term. Oil cures, which is essentially the way that it just kind of it solidifies and bonds to the wood, as opposed to, Michael says that spice box was outstanding. Thank you. I do appreciate that. And I see a couple of other questions here after the Mike Michelli comment. So you can have problems putting a film finish over top of an oil afterwards. The longer you can let the oil dry up, the better your chances are that you're not going to have trouble. It does sometimes take quite a long time for the oil. Linseed oil tends to cure up a lot slower than tung oil when you're using a certain type of solvent. So let's talk a little bit about my favorite. I'm going to go over to the shellac. This is just Zinsers. You can buy it at pretty much any big box store. I tend to use the amber color more so than the clear. As I said, it's the excretion of the lac bug that is then dissolved in alcohol. People all the time want to know about waxed versus de-waxed, and to me, the answer is, who cares? I've done an awful lot of finishing over the years, and I've never had a problem with anything sticking to shellac or shellac sticking to anything else. I'm pretty sure it sticks to Teflon. I've never tried to stick Teflon to shellac, but I'm assuming since one sticks to the other, the equation goes both ways. Shellac is super abrasion resistant. They used to finish bowling alleys with it. So if I put it on a piece of furniture, I'm going to get a build, which means I'm going to get some shine out of it pretty quickly. I can, with various types of abrasives and things like that, I can adjust the shine to be either sort of that eggshell or a matte finish on up to skating rink mirror kind of a finish. You know, if I want to French polish with this, I certainly can, and that's going to help me build a lot of finish in tiny little layers, and it's going to help also make it very, very shiny. To get the same kind of effect out of tung oil, which is probably my favorite type of oil to use as a finish, I'm going to have to apply dozens of coats to get that kind of a build, unless I add some kind of a film finish to it. And then the polyurethanates and the lacquer, the idea there is those things are basically better living through chemistry. They're, like I said, they're artificial versions, they're chemical versions of the natural finishes, and they tend to build pretty quickly. They do add in a lot of cases, some UV resistance into these finishes. So they'll be able to stand a lot more light before the color starts to break down and before that surface starts to break down too. If you put shellac out in sunlight, eventually the film itself is going to start to break down. That's not necessarily the case with some of the more UV friendly film finishes, like the oil-based armor seal that is General Finishes oil-based polyurethane, and then this is their high performance, which is their water-based. Most things are going to go water-based sooner or later. The only thing I can see sort of sticking around long-term is shellac, because it's all natural. And if I had the tried and true varnish oil here, again, that's all, it's linseed oil and natural tree amber, so you're really getting more of a historical kind of a varnish out of it. There are a couple of other companies that are making varnishes. You can look, a lot of the spar varnishes that are made for boats don't have any urethane in them. If they say urethane in the ingredients, they're a poly. They're not a true varnish. The reason that I like shellac so much is if you happen to chip it, scratch it, or abrade it, it's very easy to fix. It melts back into itself. And this goes to Leo's comment earlier, where the polyurethanes don't tend to melt into the layer before. So what you have is one layer on top of another. And if you were to rub it out, you may actually rub through one layer into another, and you'll see these funky lines coming through. And that is also a negative on polyurethanes, even the ones here that I've got from General Finishes. If you scratch these, your basic remedy is to strip it off, sand the piece down, and then build up a whole new finish. There's not a whole lot of repairing that you can do in these things, because once that finish cures, it's not going to stick to the layer below it unless you seriously abrade it. And to be honest with you, these things, maybe not so much the water-based, but certainly the armor seal, once that stuff cures, I haven't tried it. I'm not suggesting you try it, but it almost feels like you can take a hammer to it and it won't, you won't dent the piece of wood because that finish is just so hard. Again, not suggesting that you should take that to a piece of furniture that you've spent a bunch of time making. All right, let me go back here. I'm going to see what other questions we have before I get too far. Jeff's question. All right. What do I think of mixing compatible products? Example, 50% Epiphanes rubbed effect varnish, no UV protection, 50% tried and true varnish for cherry, a la Christian Bexford. Well, I haven't used the Epiphanes. Again, the thing you got to watch with Epiphanes, as far as I know, my only experience with it is with boats. Exterior varnishes have stuff in them to keep them soft, sticky, and pliable longer, because those things are seriously exposed to the light, and a lot of them are exposed to very wet, humid conditions. So you have to watch that you're not using an exterior varnish. If you are, you're going to have to add some dryers to the mix so that it doesn't remain soft, pliable, and sticky for a very long time. So that's where I was saying you can get spar varnishes or marine varnishes. These things, marine varnishes tend to have a lot more UV protection in them. They are not necessarily spar varnishes. Spar varnishes, and again, you're gonna have to look at the ingredients in these things, because it's getting few and far between where you can go out there and buy. I don't know about Epiphanes if they make one that doesn't have urethane in the ingredients list. If it is, then it's just a polyurethane. It could be an oil-based, it could be a water-based. It's most likely it's an oil-based because you're mixing it with tried and true, or a Christian is. So the idea is, if that's what you're doing, you just got to make sure that they are compatible. You're not trying to mix a water-based finish and an oil-based finish, because it just doesn't work. Typically, as I was talking about earlier, if you're looking for the best of both worlds, scratch and abrasion resistance and the ability to build up a shine on top of that wood, and you want the penetration and the moisture resistance that you get from the oil, there's about an 800-year-old formula, which is, you might want to write this down. I'll wait for you to get a piece of paper and a pencil. Okay, that's long enough. 1/3 varnish, 1/3 oil of your choice. Historically, it was boiled linseed oil, not raw linseed oil. Raw linseed oil never dries and goes rancid. Boiled linseed oil does not, although I don't think it's boiled today. Or tung oil. I prefer tung oil over the other, over linseed oil. So 1/3 oil, 1/3 varnish, true varnish, not a polyurethane, and 1/3 thinner. And your choices for thinner, because we're working with an oil-based, we're creating an oil-based varnish here, are, you could do the historical, which is turpentine. You could do paint thinner, mineral spirits, or naphtha. And of those, naphtha is my go-to. Now, you might find that you can't get naphtha where you live. And that's because state and federal government are slowly, and in some cases rather rapidly, clamping down on those volatile chemicals that throw pollutants up into the air and damage the ozone and other things that are in the environment. I can understand not making them available to industry because they're using thousands of gallons all the time. For the average homeowner, woodworker, hobbyist, avocational finisher, you're not going to have enough here that you're going to create an environmental disaster. I doubt any of you guys are buying these things railroad cars loads at a time. So as long as the epiphanes is compatible with the tried and true, I have absolutely no problem with it. It's very similar to that 800-year-old formula that I was giving you. The primary difference is I don't know what the epiphanes is made from. I'd have to look at the ingredients on the MSDS sheet. You've had good results with it on cherry. That's awesome. If it works and it dries up, that's good. Michael says, often I start with shellac, but finish with something else, as shellac will stick to anything and anything will stick to shellac. Yeah, and then you throw in there the de-wax thing. Okay. Thousands of pieces of furniture I've made. We have sealed things with shellac after we color it, in the middle of coloring it, depending on what we're trying to do. And then built up coats of other types of finish, varnish for one, lacquers for others. I've never really used too much in the way of the catalyzed finishes, conversion varnishes, and things like that. I just never did enough commercial type work. Occasionally a kitchen where we used some catalyzed stuff just to get something that was going to hold up to the rigors of daily use in a really harsh environment. You may not think of your kitchen as being a harsh environment, but it is. To me, you're to get, and I don't want to stray too far off it does stick to anything, but I've never, not once, had any of those other finishes, and I very seldom use de-waxed. It's all amber, not it's, and I've never had anything separate between the shellac and whatever top coat was going on top of that. The great thing about shellac as a seal coat is somewhere in there, in one of these things recently, we talked about how under normal conditions on this planet, you can't have alcohol without having some water in it, because at room temperature and normal atmospheric pressure here on this planet, alcohol becomes gaseous immediately. So it's also hygroscopic, so it's sucking moisture out of the air and stays liquid. The only way that it really stays liquid at normal pressures and normal temperatures is with the presence of some water. So that water, when you put the shellac on, is going to help raise the grain, and then the shellac is going to dry very rapidly and sort of lock all of those fibers that were pushed over from sanding, scraping, hand planing into the upward position. And that way, when you go back and you sand again, you're shearing them off to create a nice smooth finish. So I don't really have a problem with any of that kind of stuff. There you go. So John's talking about the fact that he's had great success with equal parts boiled linseed oil, mineral spirits, and a poly, and it's easy to wipe on. Yep. And you can use polys. I said don't, because I'm not much of a poly fan, because they're not really repairable. The addition of the linseed oil and the mineral spirits. Now, the big thing you got with mineral spirits is it really is essentially a petroleum-based product at this point. So you've got that to contend with on several levels. The fact that it's volatile, the fact that it feels oily compared to naphtha. Naphtha, like I said, it flashes off. It doesn't leave the surface oily or greasy or any of that stuff. It actually evaporates quicker than mineral spirits. So that's also a reason I like it better, because when I mix it either in my linseed oil as the base for my oil stain, or if I'm mixing it with my oil and varnish mix, uh, I'll get the deep penetration out of the oil component, but it dries everything up and flashes off fast enough that I don't have to wait days or weeks for it to be dry enough to actually coat again. All right, so does de-wax shellac? Leo wants to know if de-wax shellac a more durable finish. I'm not really, like I said, I don't really have a ton of experience messing around with de-wax shellac. Supposedly, if you get Zinsser's clear sealer, sanding sealer, it's like a 1 pound cut clear shellac, which has been de-waxed. Clear, by definition, I believe, is de-waxed, which is more like a 1.5 to 2 pound cut, as opposed to amber, which comes through at a 3 pound cut. That's a topic for another show, all on its own. Oh, Jim Hamilton's here. Awesome. So really, when we start to think about building up those finishes, if I'm doing a tabletop, it's going to be in somebody's kitchen, mine these days, because I'm not making much for clients anymore, or a bedside stand or something like that. That's where I'm turning around and I'm mixing up that oil, varnish, and thinner mix. And again, if you're into the polyurethane thing, knock yourself out. Just know that at some point, if it gets scratched or the surface is abraded or chipped, it's not an easy repair at all. Okay. That said, you don't necessarily want to finish it with shellac, even though shellac is really abrasion resistant, because, if it's your kitchen table and somebody sets a drink on there and the glass sweats, or if you are imbibing in the adult beverage thing and somebody knocks it over, which does constitute alcohol abuse, the alcohol will start to soften the finish. The sweating of a glass will create those white ring marks. Again, the great thing about shellac is very easily repaired. The oil varnish thinner mix that I use, that's what I use for my clients for decades on kitchen and dining tables to build it up. In fact, I would give them a small container of the stuff, because if they got a minor scratch in there, rather than call me up and make me go down there and fix a tiny little scratch, hey, here's a little piece of 400 grit sandpaper, here's a container of the oil and a little bit of steel wool. Here's what you do. Lightly sand the area, rag it off. Take a rag, dip it in, a clean rag, dip it into the oil and varnish mixture, feather it out as far as you can around that little scratch, let it sit, come back a day or two later with the really fine steel wool and sort of lightly abrade it until it's gone, until you no longer see those feathered out edges. Most of the time they called me anyway, but the idea was, and for those that lived on the West Coast, it was just easier to send some stuff to them. So Troy says he bought 2 gallons of naphtha after the last discussion. Yep. Joe says there are linseed oils that are actually boiled, heated, no chemical dryers, then filtered and boiled again, and then bottled. Swedish boiled linseed oil and or double boiled from India. Oh, awesome. That would be, that's good to know. And Vincent says, for me, shellac is very hard to apply because it dries so fast. Not sure why I'm not getting it. Probably overworking it. And if that's what you think, you are 99% correct. You are overworking it. When I was showing you guys the brushing technique, again, you can go back to the video from a month or so ago, where I showed the brushing techniques. It's about learning how to thin out. I never used full strength shellac, 3-pound cut. I'm pulling it down into a 1.5 to 2-pound cut, depending on how much alcohol I add. Very shallowly dipping the brush into that, keeping the bristles very vertical, and applying it very rapidly. And if you go back and forth more than 2 or 3 times total, you're going to start to drag and pull the shellac because the alcohol flashes off so quickly. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm going to have to check. Hey, Michael Michelli's here. We were just talking about you, buddy. Yeah, I'm going to have to look into those actual boiled linseed oils there, Joe. Says the process using salts and heat to boil. I'm assuming you didn't mean Lois, you meant the oil, eliminating molds and bacteria that leads to darkening over time. Yep. Okay. Mike says he's just checking in. It's his kind of stuff. Oh, good. Oh, good. That's the end of the questions. Awesome. I'll give you 10 seconds. So if I had to, and the brushing lacquer, once again, kind of a rarity around here. That's usually for something that says, I need it done today for whatever reason. And I need something that is alcohol and water and abrasion resistant. So this stuff dries pretty quickly. This is Minwax. If I can get it, I actually like Deft. Essentially, it's like the type of lacquer that you spray. They've just added a lot of retarders to it so that you can actually brush it out. If Vincent thinks he's having having too much trouble brushing shellac, don't try and brush lacquer at all without a lot of retarder in it. Voigt varnish is a washed linseed oil that is super clear. Thanks, Mike. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to have to look into some of those things because I tend not to. I mean, I make my oil stain out of boiled linseed oil, and that's about it. So I've never noticed it darkening, but then I'm also adding a massive amount of colorants to it to make it into a stain, into an oil stain, rather than I'm not using it very often as a top coat. Even though I have it out here for the top coat episode here. This stuff, Minwax tongue oil finish. I'm not really even sure there's tongue oil in it. I know it's more of a polyurethane kind of a thing going on there. There may be something tongue oil like in it, but if it is, I'm not sure what it is. I've never really bothered to look at it. Once again, something that I try not to use too terribly often. Again, it's about trying to build quicker, get it to dry up a lot faster. Kind of the same. I've got them here because you just never know when you need something to happen rather rapidly. I'm trying to see if they have dates on these things because I probably owned both of these cans for quite some time. I'm not sure. I mean, let's put it this way. They're a good 5 to 10 years old. They're still liquid in the cans. So I think I'm okay. I would test anything you keep for any length of time. Test it on something, see if it actually dries. That's usually my test for shellac. Zinsser tells you the shellac is good for 2, 3, 5, whatever years. If I mix my own, I know when I made it. I don't mix more than I really need, usually. So I'm using the bulk of it as fast as possible. If I happen to have Zinsser again, because sometimes something comes up, we need a little finish here, and we don't want to wait overnight for the shellac to dissolve when we mix it out of flakes. So for me, the idea is always have a little bit of this stuff on hand. If you test it, take it, brush it on a piece of scrap wood for shellac. If it doesn't dry in half an hour, if it's still sticky half an hour, 2 hours later, chances are you just need to get some fresh shellac. How many coats do you apply for naphtha, tung oil, and varnish? I felt after 2 or 3 coats, I wasn't applying anything. So what's happening is when you're mixing that, you're adding 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 varnish, oil, and thinner, right? So if you feel like you're not really building up a coat, what you're going to do is mix up some new stuff. It's 1/3 varnish and 1/3 oil and 1/3 nothing. Okay, so 50-50. I was waiting to see if that gets through. 50-50 oil and varnish, and then you can apply it that way, and you will get more build that way. It's the whole idea with that really old 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 formula is you're going to get that deep penetration because the thinner's in there, the oil's in there, and you're getting that deep penetration, which is going to give you a lot more of that moisture resistance. But you're going to get some of the build and some of the scratch resistance that you're going to get from the varnish. Pardon me. So if you're going to apply it and you're seeing how many coats do I apply, that's a personal preference kind of a thing. I always start by saying somewhere between 3 and 10. If you put on 2 or 3 coats and it looks thick enough and shiny enough to you, stop. If you look at it and say, boy, that still looks kind of dry, which is how I tend to keep my finishes, on the thinner and the drier side. Most of the pieces that I've made from throughout my career end up in homes that are either filled with antiques or they wish they were. So antiques tend not to have bright, shiny finishes on them after 200 or 300 years, unless they've been refinished, in which case then you're going to build up a lot of finish on there and make it nice and shiny. So as many coats as it takes to get to a point where you look at the surface and go, I'm good with that. I tend to rub my finishes out at the end. So, and I sand in between coats, even shellac, where they tell you really don't need to. When we talked about the other week when we did the surface prep, to me, that's all part of that foundation. When I lay that coat of shellac on there, let it dry, sand it, tack it off, even though shellac will melt into itself. I don't want the abrasive from my sandpaper or, giving any kind of grit or pebbliness to my shellac. And again, I'm brushing almost exclusively at this point because the only spray equipment that I can really use at this point is an HVLP gun that's hooked to a turbine. I got rid of my big air compressor years ago. And the turbines tend to put out warm air. And if you're trying to spray shellac with it, it gets very pebbly very rapidly. It tends to dry it out, and it doesn't allow the shellac to flow out. So, if you work on that brushing technique, you should be able to brush shellac over even a large area pretty rapidly. I do have a couple of, I have an old Binks Model 7 gun, which is, just, if I started spraying this tabletop here, for example, by the time I was done, you wouldn't be able to see me on camera because the fog of finish would be so big. And I have one gravity-fed HVLP gun that I could run off of my small compressor if I needed to spray a very, very large area. In California, naphtha is not available. Alternatives. So, Skip, yeah, so you're stuck with trying to find some of the others there. I told you for all of your oil-based things, your solvents are turpentine, paint thinner, mineral spirits, naphtha. So I can't imagine that you can't find turpentine somewhere. Just be aware of the fact that if you're not working in a really well environmentally controlled area, that if you have really humid days or really wet, rainy days, if you're in Southern California, you don't have to worry about that anyway. There's a possibility that it could take a very long time for your oil-based finishes to cure. Let's see. Rex wants to know, do I have thoughts on citrus solvents? I'm glad you asked, because right here behind my tung oil, and I want you to know that none of the companies here that I have here, General Finishes, Minwax, Zinsser, Real Milk Paint, none of those companies pay me anything. I'm not even sure who made the boiled linseed oil that I have. It's just, I picked it up at the big box store. But I do like Real Milk Paint's tung oil, and they have a really great citrus solvent. I've used it a lot. When Alex Snodgrass has been here teaching his cutting board classes, I really like the idea of using 50% citrus solvent and 50% tung oil as my go-to finish for those end grain cutting boards. It soaks in. I mean, you can apply it to the top and if you mix it 50-50, the finish will soak all the way through those end grain cutting boards. I mean, you'll apply it on both sides, but when you flip it over, you'll see it starting to leach out on that bottom side. And to me, I think it's a great alternative to some of the chemical stuff. I have not tried the citrus solvent, mixing it with the varnish and my tung oil. I suppose that's something I ought to try at some point. To me, it just never occurred to me to try and use the citrus solvent instead of the naphtha. So I'll take that under advisement now that I'm thinking about it, and I will get back to you, Skip, whether or not, because the citrus solvent should be available everywhere, I would think. Douglas says, I cleaned a bed rail on an antique bed with mineral spirits, and the finished fogged to a milky fog. Any idea why? Usually when you're getting that fogginess in your top coat finish, you're trapping moisture down inside there. There's several old remedies for this. Somebody once early on in my career said cigarette ash and mayonnaise. And if you happen to be in California, you can't get naphtha. I doubt you'll get cigarettes to create the cigarette ash. Cigarette ash and mayonnaise, and spread that on there, and it's supposed to draw the moisture out and clear up that fogginess. What it is it's flashing off too fast, and there's moisture building up in between the layers of finish on there. So what I found works really well is coat the thing with some Vaseline, let it sit overnight, wipe the Vaseline off, don't use more mineral spirits or whatever. Just clean it down, and it should draw all of that moisture out through your finishes and not have a problem. Troy says, sanding between layers of shellac, wet sanding at 400. No, I wouldn't wet sand anything personally until I got to the end. And I'm using 280, 320, sometimes 400, depending on how many layers I've already built up. My first couple of layers, I'm using the 280 grit because it's going to help me cut through any brush marks and stuff like that and really help level down that shellac so that when I build up subsequent layers, it's not really, you're not putting brush strokes on top of brush strokes on top of brush strokes at that point. You're really sort of getting that smooth undercarriage so that when you lay another layer of the stuff on top, you're not just compounding what minor errors you've had all along. So, and as far as wet sanding goes, the only wet sanding I do is with mineral oil, and I probably wouldn't use any oil-based product in between layers of finish for the same reason a lot of people are so obsessed with the waxed and de-waxed thing with shellac. They're worried about things sticking. I'm not saying I'm definitely going to have a problem, but why introduce a known substance that is going to potentially cause a problem? You know, if you're using shellac as a base coat, your sealer, and then you're going to build up varnish on top of it, say, wet sanding with some kind of a mineral oil. I mean, you can wet sand with water, but then we're back to that incompatibility thing. If you're using an oil-based varnish on top, you've got a water-based layer in there that's not really that's gonna potentially cause a problem. And it's not that your varnish isn't going to stick to your shellac. If you still have moisture, water in there somewhere in the layer, that's going to cause the separation. Did I get everybody's questions? Do we have any others? Hopefully that all makes sense. So that's basically where I wanted to go with these tonight. Again, it's not a how to apply the finishes. It's, hey, I like shellac the best. Why? Because to me, I like the color that it imparts on the piece. That gives a depth of the finish that you just can't get with anything else. It's a natural product. It's highly abrasion and scratch resistant. Unfortunately, it has that drawback of not being moisture and alcohol resistant. I like tried and true varnish oil because it's the closest thing that I can buy commercially to a historical varnish, which usually was linseed oil based. And then, like I said, they would thin it with turpentine and add in tree amber, which is a solid that would then turn around and you'd be able to spread that out. Tree amber, shockingly, has a slight amber color to it. Most finishes, natural finishes, are going to have some kind of a naturally yellowy orange kind of a color. Like I said, I do like of the ones I have here, the general finishes Armor Seal. I tend to like a lot. It flows on much like shellac or varnish does. You can brush it on, you can rag it on, you can pour it on, walk away, come back later, you know, whatever. It takes a long time to dry. It's a nice slow dryer. So if I'm brushing that on, I like the way that it brushes out. I like the way that it dries up and how quickly it builds. I made a quarter sawn white oak countertop in my house for just a little area next to my laundry room, and that was the perfect use for it because who knows what we're going to throw on top of that countertop. When the grandkids come, they throw all of their toys and wet jackets and everything up on top of that countertop. So I wanted something that was going to take a ton of abrasion resistance and the moisture resistance as well. So that stuff really, to me, works well. For those that have been to my shop, that I have bird's eye maple wainscoting in the bathroom, and that was all finished with this high performance water-based poly from General Finishes, I can tell you from firsthand experience, um, brushing it is kind of a pain. It does not level out very well when you brush it. It works much better with a foam brush or a foam roller, but ultimately, the best way to apply it is to spray it. I have tool cabinets in here that are all finished in this high performance stuff that all the finishes on there were sprayed, and it goes on a lot quicker. It levels out faster. I have not had the problem with that, spraying it with the HVLP gun and the turbine that I get from Shellac, but the water-based stuff just isn't as volatile. It doesn't flash off and dry up as quick. Leo wants to know about Waterlux. So Waterlux is very much akin to this stuff. I like it better because it actually is tung oil, and it's got some dryers and some polyurethane in there to help it build a little quicker. Waterlux, I think, is a really good, easy to use kind of a finish. Again, you can rag it on, you can brush it on. You can do just about anything you want with it, and it'll go on. That to me is very similar to the Armor Seal. It's just, it goes on. It doesn't impart a really plasticky look, which is what most polyurethanes have been throughout my career. You put them on and it looks like, here in the Pocono Mountains, there are several restaurants that if you go into, they've got those live edge tables and it looks like they poured about a gallon of epoxy over it, and the finish is, about 1.5 inches thick, and it's shiny and looks like it was just encased in plastic. And to me, that's the way that most polyurethanates come across. That's what I like about shellac, is it's natural. It's got that ambery kind of glow to it. It never looks plastic intake. Even if you've French polished with it and brought it up to a really high shine, it just doesn't look fake. It enhances the look of the wood far more than most of these other chemical-based finishes. Troy says he didn't like the water-based. I'm assuming this stuff. Dexter D. Newbie. Oh, yes, missed me at the. Do I use shellac flakes? Yes. If I am finishing something for myself or a client, I will mix up shellac tonight. So I use flakes and hopefully good alcohol. And my method of making a 3-pound cut is ridiculously simple. I take a 1-quart jar, I fill it right up to pretty much up to the top with shellac flakes. I take the alcohol, I dump it in until it just covers the surface of the shellac flakes, screw on the top, let it sit. Come back tomorrow and give it a stir, and chances are everything will have been dissolved. And if we check the viscosity, it's going to be pretty close to a 3-pound cut. And then at that point, I start to divide it up and thin it out the way I want. If I'm going to use it as a seal coat, I might thin it down, 50 to 75% alcohol to the shellac, so that I get a really thin, very fast drying seal coat. If I'm going to start to build up, I'm going to cut it back to about a 1.5 to 2-pound cut, so that I can start to build up layers. Very seldom do I go much thicker than about a 2-pound cut. So hopefully that sort of answers that question. So if there really aren't a whole lot of other questions in this, we've now gone for a little more than an hour. Once again, about a half an hour longer than I wanted to go. But it was good. This is really what these live sessions are about, is interacting with the people that get to show up. If you are watching this post live session, that's impetus for you to show up during the live sessions, 8 o'clock every Tuesday night, unless I let you know otherwise. So it's a good idea to go to my website, which should be right here, down here somewhere along the bottom here. You should be able to see my website. Subscribe to my newsletter. I do send out a weekly reminder that this is coming up and what the topic is. I'm glad that all of you are here this evening. What is the shelf life of shellac flakes? For me, once again, I'm going to test it, and if it gets to as far as I understand, shellac flakes don't expire. It only expires when you mix it into something. So theoretically, I guess you could let it all dry out again and get nice and hard. You could spread it out, turn it back into flakes, and then remelt it again. But I've never really tried that. So don't do that unless you really want to. I'm going to say, like I said, sign up for the newsletter if you are watching this now, or if you're watching it post live. Be sure to subscribe. If you're watching it on YouTube, subscribe and like the video, and make sure you have notifications turned on, because when I go live, you should get a notice. If you're watching it on Facebook, hey, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate so many people coming out every week, and the questions have been awesome. So next week, I am going to show you, we're going to talk a little bit about spoke shave versus file and rasp. And I'm going to be working on some cabriole legs, and I'm going to show you why I prefer one over the other. So until next week, thanks for watching. Again, tune in next Tuesday, 8 p.m. If I don't see any other questions here in the next 2 or 3 seconds. Oh, James is here. Awesome. We got a lot of people in tonight. Thanks again for coming out. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next week.